So here we are, Christmas survivors on the cusp of 2020, a new decade. And I keep thinking it can't get here a minute too soon. Then I realized that really it could. Consider the past 10 years. This decade began with Si se puede, yes we can. It was a time when the dreams of so many were realized. 10 years later, in a brutal, hyper-partisan era, we're more likely to hear accusations and lamentations. Can they really do that? I hear myself say. Surely they can't. The cries go out from both sides of the aisle. Bret Stephens of the New York Times captured this period in U.S. history beautifully, saying that the national elections going into this decade were about hope. The election cycle coming out of it is about soap, cleaning up the mess we're in. Think about the changes in our daily lives enabled by technology. The first iPhone was released 12 years ago. I swore I'd never get one. The iPad, Uber, Alexa, Instagram, all less than 10 years. How many of us have everything we used to hold in our hands, store in our drawers and on our shelves, place on our desktops, hang on our walls beside us right now? Technology is a wonder to behold, but by now we are well aware of its ugly underbelly. Uses and misuses of social media, especially. Then there are our personal journeys. Trish Houck and I have gotten married 3 times in the last 10 years to each other. First was here in 2009 with family and friends, life-changing, but without any expectation that we would ever enjoy the protections of a legal marriage. Then a few years later, we did marry legally, at least in Maine. And then just 2 years after that, a U.S. Supreme Court ruling married us again in every state of the Union, including Texas. But now, given the brawl between progressive and regressive forces, will those protections hold in the next decade? It's been quite a ride, these 2010s. Thrilling, astonishing, humbling, horrifying, providing a push and pull as we approach the next decade. Frozen between it can't get here fast enough and could we just rest for a while? Crossing Thresholds is a great blog about managing the big transitions in life. It starts with a story about the author's cat, Merton. Merton and his human family, his staff, made a big move to California a few years back. Soon after arriving at their home, Merton's owners noticed that he would only lie down in the doorways, stretched across the thresholds between one room and another. They saw this as a mechanism for coping with his new life. They even imagined he might be a Sufi in repose, intentionally seeking positions between two worlds. A more obvious explanation, of course, is that Merton was stuck on the threshold. He was not ready or willing to fully embrace this new life in California and all the changes that come with it. I totally get Merton. Nonetheless, with 2020 in our sights, how do we prepare for all the life-changing transitions ahead? Clearly, there's nothing magical about a new year or a new decade. It's just that we are time-bound creatures. We have a beginning and an end. As a result, we tend to time-stamp our lives, especially the most important moments. So on the threshold of a new year, a new decade, with the 2010s already in the rearview mirror, are we ready for the 2020s? How can we possibly prepare ourselves for the come what may of this world. Now, first, I want to sort something out about the change process, whether they are personal or universal. Big transitions are often described as thresholds, and it's a great metaphor. If someone warns us that we are on the threshold of disaster, we know not to make another move. If we believe we are on the threshold of a better life, we jump in with both feet, I hope. Thresholds are great images, but just as architectural thresholds mark the boundary between one space and another, our symbolic thresholds are places or events very specific that distinguish the before and after of major transitions. The best thing about the metaphorical thresholds is that most are not surprises. We plan for the birth of a child. We decide to get married. Were you surprised when you graduated from high school or college? Maybe everyone else was. But by the time you did, you had done a lot to get there, completed the classes, filled out the forms, you had a time and a date of graduation or completion. There was a long ramp to get to the diploma or certificate proclaiming your passage from student to graduate or practitioner. So thresholds are just place marks for the much larger transitions taking place. I was thrilled when a friend introduced me to a book by the Rabbi Sherry Hirsch about life's thresholds, cleverly titled Thresholds. It begins with an introduction called Rooms and Hallways, the before and after of our threshold moments, where we spend most of our time. Rooms are the places we land in and launch from between the inevitable disruptions of life, those events and situations that change us in meaningful ways. So if an engagement is the hallway and a wedding is the threshold, then marriage is the room we occupy during our wedded lives. Some marriages last a lifetime, though they too are forever changing. We need to rearrange or replace the furniture from time to time. Ultimately, though, marriages do end for at least one partner, the one that survives the death of their beloved. Other marriages end for both through divorce. Either way, when married life is disrupted, we are launched out of that room towards the next through a hallway. Hallways are the places that capture my imagination because that's where the action is. Hallways are where we regain our balance and learn how to navigate new terrain as we find our ways to the next room. Now, for simplicity, I am speaking as if there's a single trajectory in our lives, but that would be too easy. We all occupy multiple rooms and hallways, passing over all sorts of thresholds along the way. So anyone who believes humans were not meant to multitask, they've never been parents, right? But back to hallways. So many of our hallways, maybe most, are the long ramps of chosen transitions, like the graduations mentioned earlier. Planners love long ramps. We research, we make lists, we map it out, we put tasks on the calendars with deadlines. Improvisers, not so much. They just use the ramps as runways to leap to the next threshold, where all shall be revealed and dealt with in the moment. It makes my planner's heart seize with anxiety. In the end, though, same hallways, different strategies, both of which are just fine, because no matter how much we do or don't chart a path to some threshold, none of us know what lies behind that inflection point. Remember Rabbi Hirsch, the author of Thresholds. Her first book was We Plan, God Laughs. Our planning may improve the odds of a successful transition or a soft landing, but we need those improvisers because they can adapt in a flash when everything goes awry. But plan or improvise, these are just change management strategies for life's expected transitions. How do we prepare for the unexpected, especially the events that knock us flat? What happens when the beautiful, well-planned wedding is followed by a devastating diagnosis that changes everything we had imagined for our married lives? How do we manage the disruptive powers of a tornado that rips our home from its foundations? How do we develop the resilience and the will to navigate all the changes and challenges that will come our way in 2020 and all the years after? Like Elizabeth Warren, I have an answer for that. Not an answer, not the answer. But it is vexing to communicate. So I will tell you a story about one of the biggest, hardest, most rewarding transitions in my life. When I came to this sanctuary to experience Unitarian Universalist worship, it was a threshold with a capital T. But I didn't know that until years later, when my arrival here was nothing more than a speck on a fading horizon. Like so many of us, I came here when my life was under reconstruction. A failed marriage, financial calamities, a new job, a health crisis, all of them. It was a classic example of life launching us out of a room we knew so well, ready or not, into a hallway that was foreign and inhospitable. You've probably been there at some point in life. If I could have kept some part of myself in that old familiar place, I absolutely would have stretched across the thresholds Merton style, however impossible and destructive, but that just wasn't an option. Before that moment, I spent years peeling off one layer after another of a life that had served me well but was no longer available or a good fit. Friends, work, therapy escorted me down those hallways in a journey that took a very, very, very long time. But underneath all the activity of those years was a foundation of faith in myself and in something beyond me in life itself that sustained and led me. Faith that was hard won. Through all the preceding transitions, this journey was not my first rodeo. Philip Booth captured that sustaining faith perfectly in our reading this morning. Lie back, and the sea will hold you. And Rilke's words provide a window into the faith that leads us forward, whether we are sailing on calm waters or floundering in rough seas. So we are grasped by what we cannot grasp. It has inner light. Faith that sustains and leads is something no one can give us. No preacher or pastor or poet can talk us into it. They can tell us it exists and point us towards the paths they know, the communities and guides and sources of wisdom they trust. But this kind of faith grows slowly in the hallways, in the places that challenge us the most, as we take one shaky step at a time. I think living into this kind of faith, one transition at a time, is the beginning and end of all good spiritual practices. I learned that here. I learned a lot about spiritual practices here, but what was uniquely UU for me is that all of these practices were attached to an action. And of course they are. We all begin our faith journey somewhere, and after we read the books and learn the exercises and engage in practice, we have to put it to the test. What does this practice do to make me a healthier person, a happier person, someone who can bring more love into my home, more love into my church, more love into the world, something that can help me work for justice? Will the sea really hold me? Can I trust that sense of knowing what I cannot yet grasp? Yes and yes, but you have to live it. Hopefully in a community of guides and fellow travelers who will encourage and ease the way. Are we prepared for whatever may come in 2020 and the years ahead? Who knows? But we are not without a guide and a compass. Here in this place, we can practice and learn to live in the kind of faith that sustains and leads us through any hallway we encounter. May it be so.